Morning. So my name's Kevin Hoogenboom, and I grew up in this church. I'm now 22, and I just recently graduated from Lehigh University in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania this past May. Today I'm thrilled to have been invited to share a little bit about how what I learned about doing God's work in this church is translated into my life away from home. What I'm talking about is service for those who are less fortunate. I'll begin by sharing a quote Pastor Jen shared with me. It was written by Frederick Buechner, and it reads, "The place God calls you to is the place where your deep gladness and the world's deep hunger meet." It's this idea that's at the core of what I learned here and what I've continued while I've been away. It began in 2007 when I went on my first mission trip to West Virginia with Senior Youth Fellowship. Seeing the poverty that we did on that trip and helping to improve quality of life for people who were really struggling was a transformative experience. I enjoyed doing God's work in this way. The following year, we went to New Orleans. A year later, to upstate New York. The year after that, to South Dakota. By the end of my high school career, I've been on 4 mission trips with this church, 4 experiences that were very impactful for me. So when I headed to college, I knew I wanted to continue this type of work. I got involved in an organization called Engineers Without Borders. It's a national nonprofit with hundreds of college and professional chapters, about 15,000 volunteer members, began in 2002. And the mission of Engineers Without Borders is to solve development issues in low-income countries across the globe. If you heard of Doctors Without Borders, it's basically the engineering version of that. Each chapter has a project ranging from installation of clean drinking water systems or proper sanitation systems to new roads or bridges to bringing electricity to a community for the first time. I had the pleasure of serving as president of Lehigh's chapter, a group of about 100 students last year as I was a senior. When I came to Lehigh, the chapter was finishing up one project in the Central American country of Honduras and getting ready to begin a new one in a nearby community. Our focus was clean drinking water, something you and I take for granted, but something 1 billion people around the world lack. Why clean water? For those who don't have it, life is filled with chronic waterborne illness and great amounts of time and energy spent on gathering this essential resource. People waste time being sick or fetching water that they could spend at work or school, so productivity is limited significantly. People are too weak or too busy dealing with something that's a complete non-issue for us, that they can't make enough money to support their family. Lack of clean water is a direct contributor to this cycle of poverty that we hear about so much. First project at Lehigh was a water system for a town of about 1,000 people. Located in a rural, mountainous area, the community once had a distribution system that brought untreated water into town, but it was destroyed by a hurricane in 1999, and there were never any means to fix that. Sickness was rampant here, especially among the children. Our chapter worked for 5 years to build a new network that delivered clean water to every household to eliminate this sickness. The new project was high in the mountains in a very isolated coffee farming community of about 300 people. These people had never had any sort of water system and have always just gathered what they could from streams and from rainwater. This project is ongoing, and like the first, will bring clean water to every household in town. Lehigh's newest project is a little different and just started up last year. Located just south of Honduras and Nicaragua this time, it'll bring clean water and sanitation systems to a campus that's going to house a high school, a community center, a computing center, and a medical services center. And it's for a rural area that has about 6,000 people spread out over a large area. Of course, these projects couldn't happen without students actually traveling to build them. I had the great opportunity to travel to Honduras once and Nicaragua twice to work on these projects. I'd like to share a little bit about my experiences on these trips. So I'll begin with Honduras. What a place. Such a beautiful country, but very befallen by poverty, corruption, and violence. The housing situation was appalling. People literally live in huts made of sticks, straw, and mud. I'd seen stuff like that on TV, but not in real life. And surrounding anywhere people live, there's about a 500-foot radius of trash just strewn about. Trash collection in Honduras is limited to the cities. Anywhere else, people just toss their garbage out the back door. That was probably the most surprising thing for me. There was trash everywhere. In the rural areas where we worked, interior plumbing is non-existent. There's no such thing as a bathroom in a house. They use the most rudimentary of outhouses, and many of which leach right into the streams from which they drink. Most places have electricity. The town our newer project is in just got it about 5 years ago. But it goes out all the time, anytime there's any rain or wind, very unreliable. Emergency services are absent. There's no 911. Most of the police are corrupt and involved in the drug trade. But a lot of good and decent people live in Honduras, and it was painful to see how hard everyday life is for them. Take Rolando. Like everyone else, he's a coffee farmer, working hard every day for minimal pay. He lives in a tiny hut with his wife and 5-year-old twin daughters, as well as at least 10 chickens. There are tons of chickens in Honduras. As soon as I met this man, I felt God's presence. He was so thankful to have us there and so willing to do whatever he could to help the project succeed. He took us all over, literally thrashing through the jungle with a machete to show us where everything we needed to survey was. He had all 7 of us into his home on the first day we met, serving us freshly brewed coffee. He gave us 3 enormous bundles of bananas, I think about 200 of them, from his banana trees. There's lots of beautiful banana trees all over Honduras. And he even hand drew a map of the town for us with a level of detail way beyond our expectations. I never heard Rolando complain, and he just never seemed to stop working. I can't describe enough how crucial his help was for our project, and I know God was there to connect us. And then there was Mateo, the school teacher in town. From day one, I could tell he was special as well. Mateo's more educated than most in Honduras, and he could have found work in a lot of places, but he had visited this village 2 years prior, seen how much it was struggling, and knew he wanted to help. As a result, he has a commute in excess of 3 hours one way, and usually only goes home on the weekends. He's also been an asset for Lehigh, standing by Rolando's side, helping to organize this community, being the person that we need when we can't be there. He doesn't even live there, yet he's invested so deeply in these people. You see a community living in such poverty, but you meet such extraordinary people that are pouring their hearts into making things better, and you can't help but think God is watching over. Most of our time in Honduras was spent surveying, taking water samples, doing engineering kind of stuff. But some of the most lasting experiences were in the evenings when the children in the neighborhood we stayed would come out and play. The majority of our group spoke very little Spanish, but we had no trouble having a lot of fun with these kids. We played sports. We taught them about Frisbee, gave them a bunch of Frisbees, read stories to them, just hung out. Most of these kids had some really rough situations. 10-year-old Yolanda had lost her teenage brother to gang violence. 3-year-old Mimo lived in a household stricken by alcohol abuse, which is a major problem in Honduras. 7-year-old Javier was homeless. And of course, none of these children had clean drinking water. Despite all that, Yolanda, Javier, Mimo, all the others were full of smiles, full of laughter, and full of love. This made our work all the more meaningful. So Kenya, Rift Valley. So I was in feet of all these lions and giraffes and everything you see in The Lion King and all that. Out in the savannah, though, people are few and far between. It's a little dangerous out there with the lions and giraffes and things. But we did see one village that was perhaps the most shocking thing I've seen on any of my trips. It was a nomadic tribe. They live about 7 hours from any sort of other civilization. All alone, no electricity, no agriculture, the land's not arable, almost no trees for fuel, certainly no vehicles, and absolutely no means of work. All they have are livestock, which they keep in a small very unsanitary area in the middle of all the houses, which they have arranged in a circle. The men go out on hunts during the day, while the women walk miles to gather food, water, and fuel. It was surreal to see people actually living like this. Yet they were very proud of their heritage and their way of life. But most of my time in Kenya was spent in more urban environments. We worked with a man named Josephat, who runs a business that makes handmade fishing ties, mostly for clients in the United States. We work with Paul, who sells milk out of a van that he must take on a 3-hour round trip every day just to collect a couple dozen bottles of milk. We worked with a girls' soccer team that gives girls a positive environment, most of whom are homeless because there wasn't enough food to eat. And we worked with a water business that aims to bring clean drinking water to community-based wells. With each business, it felt like we were turning the clock back 100 years. Kenya's just so far behind in so many areas. I'll close my discussion of Kenya by sharing the most moving experience I had. On one afternoon, my group went to visit a market where many of these street boys that I mentioned earlier hang out. They wait there each day for the scraps of food that the vendors throw out. It was hard to see. There were so many of them. Almost all were on drugs. They sniffed glue, a cheap and readily accessible substance, as a way of coping with the pain of daily life. At one point, I went to greet one of the boys, probably about age 12. I don't even remember his name, but as soon as I went to shake his hand, he just started to hug me. And he didn't let go, so I hugged him back. In that moment, I knew God was there, and I'll never forget it. In closing, doing this work in 3 different countries has been a really unique opportunity, but it's mostly been about the learning experience. So I wanted to share a few things I learned. First, I learned that making personal connections and building relationships is the absolute most important part in doing development work. The engineering might be perfect, the plan might look great on paper, but it's never going to succeed if the primary focus isn't people. Second, development work takes time and it takes patience. Making those personal connections and making sure things are done right is a process, not an event. And this type of work is a two-sided effort, requiring commitment and trust from both sides. It takes time to create that. You have to control that desire to get out and build something right away, because long-term solutions require long-term efforts. Third, you have to free yourself from judgment and see the value in each person you're helping. Everyone's fighting an uphill battle. We're all human and we're all connected. Everyone has something to teach and everyone has something to learn. Finally, God is always with you. Sometimes when I was deep in the jungle of Honduras or halfway across the globe on a Kenyan street, I felt like I was so removed from everything in my life that maybe God wasn't there either. But each time I was reminded by a boy I'd never met hugging me at random, or by a man with hardly enough food for himself giving it away to me, that God is always with me. And that was enough to keep me going. In God's name we pray, amen.
So we need an engineer to help fix my microphone. We do. Thank you so much, Kevin, for that. It was a privilege for those of us on staff to get to hear this twice. It's a very moving story, and we so appreciate your sharing it with us and your experiences with us.